Test. All right. All right.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me. Hi. I'm sorry. It's not. We're gonna get a crap out of it for a while.
I know.
Yeah.
We'll be outside and running for brothers.
All right.
Have a good night.
What?
You have a good night.
What I do.
Oh, thank you. You have a good night.
I didn't. So.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Very
It makes it feel better. Matt was the one that said she gets it. I should just do that. A lot of it.
So we'll go to get started.
We love you.
I would have loved it.
Sounds like a personal problem. No, we're good.
So we'll go ahead and get started. Lord, we thank you for another day you kept us. We thank you for bringing us back to class. We ask that your wisdom and your love be manifest in everything that we say and everything that we do. In your precious name we pray, amen. Cool. How is everyone? Cold? Yeah, me too. But what do you expect from January 74th? January just will not stop. Like, it didn't get the memo. Stop, January, stop. Right? So there's that, and apparently, I guess the interest movie is coming out. Anybody excited about that? The interest movie, right? So I heard that there is, which I think is interesting. They're playing a new love interest in this Avengers movie. I think it's called Stucky. Yeah, Stucky. Steve Rogers and Bucky are supposedly a nondescript couple. Yeah. So in this movie, so I think they're doing a little bit of pandering in this movie, trying to play to an audience. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But never, yeah.
How factual is that, or is that just like a rumor?
Well, it's a thing that is kind of, we'll see when the movie comes out how factual that is. But they're Captain America and Buck. I don't know if you've seen the posters. You can look them up. They have very sexually suggestive poses that are not traditionally male poses. So it's the pose with, you see lots of women doing this pose. They're kind of doing that pose, and I'm not, interesting. So, will anybody do anything exciting this weekend? Anything exciting, fun, interesting? No, you guys don't have a, okay.
I watched a really good documentary called The Heart of Man on Netflix.
The Heart of Man. What was the?
It was about like the prodigal son, and just talking about like personal stories about people
Who were kind of the prodigal son, so to speak. That's
really
great.
good.
Oh, cool. I do know that there is a movie about Paul, the life of Paul. I think one is airing like right down the street from my house in Moundsville, which is done by the same people who did The Passion of the Christ. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what they end up saying about or how they depict Paul. The Heart of Man. I'll go check that out. Anybody else see anything cool on Netflix or any other streaming service? No? Cool. You didn't have to do anything cool or anything, You didn't have to have a life on the weekends. I wasn't joking. I'm just joking. All right. So, just a couple of things I want to clear up, and I want to make sure are clear in your mind as we move forward, because these will be some reoccurring themes that will pop up. And one is this idea of discrimination. And so, what what is discrimination? So how do we talk about discrimination? Ultimately, what is it? It is a very short definition. It is about what? What is discrimination? No, go ahead. I know you know already. What is discrimination?
What? Come on, guys.
It is what?
Treating people differently.
Treating people differently, all right. Ultimately, it is simply an action. That's right. So discrimination is an action, right? And so in the United States, the government says we want to protect people from these negative actions, right? So there are typically these negative actions based on bigotry, based on prejudice or stereotypes or whatever, right? So there are these negative actions, and the idea is that discrimination is an action that is designed to keep people out or keep people from getting something, right? And so what are some legal precedents that have been set to try to protect people from these, from bigoted or prejudice or methods that people use to try to keep people away from things that are rightfully theirs? What are some of those?
Brown versus Board.
So Brown versus Board. Do you know what year that was?
6.
1955. Actually, it's 54, but it was, we'll work with 54, 55 works, right? And so that's Brown v. Board. And what did Brown v. Board do, particularly in the educational setting? What did Brown v. Board do? Yes.
That segregation in schools is no longer backed by the law.
So racial segregation of schools, because before Brown versus Board of Education, what was the policy called? Separate but equal, and it was based on what case? This is important for you to write down. If you don't know it, this is important because you might see it again. Plessy versus Ferguson, which set up the idea that separate but equal. Plessy versus Ferguson. And so Brown versus the Board of Education reversed that, right? What was another legal precedent for trying to fight discrimination? What was another one?
Civil Rights Act.
The School Rights Act. All right. Oh, the Civil Rights Act. Yes. Of what year? 1964 Civil Rights Act. Right? And so it suggested that the action of eliminating people from jobs and all sorts of stuff cannot be based on race or ethnicity or blah, 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 right? Or gender or all sorts of other things. So it set up these legal protections around that stuff. So the tie that I want to make, and what I want to make very clear, is that this idea of microaggressions, they are not discrimination. And we talked a little bit about microaggressions, right? So the example of the woman in New York that was walking down the street and people were catcalling her, and they counted how many times people were saying things to her as she's just walking down the street. Or a picture like this that contextually is the same thing as that video, except they didn't have vines back in 1950, right? Vine, no. Okay. So in this particular picture, does this woman look comfortable in this particular environment? I would say no. And for those of us who might say no, what are some clues? What are some contextual or context clues that give us the impression that she's not comfortable in that environment?
Face looks concerned.
Her face looks concerned.
Her
peg is close to her waist. It seems like she's covering her jacket halfway.
Yeah, so she's holding her valuables close, just kind of covering herself in that particular environment. Is there, as we look at this picture, and again, we don't know all the laws of that particular thing, but if we were to use our current mindset in looking at this picture, is there anything in this picture that is occurring that is illegal? Are there any laws being broken here? Maybe loitering, okay, right? Maybe loitering, but for the most part, I would say in looking at this picture that there aren't any laws here. However, are they trying to lift up or raise her humanity through their behaviors? I would say probably not. I would say that they may think that they may be funny or cute or whatnot, but it doesn't appear that she finds their stuff very novel, right? Very interesting. And so she's experiencing these microaggressions, these small little things that are not designed to increase her humanity or encourage her in a positive way. And so what I'd like to suggest is that this idea that discrimination are these actions and that microaggressions are these small things that are not illegal. They're not illegal, but what they don't do is increase someone's discretionary effort. All right. So we have discrimination and we have micro aggressions. And so microaggressions are all these little small things that directly impact someone's discretionary effort. And what is discretionary effort? How could we talk about discretionary effort? What are discretionary funds? When you get your check after you've paid taxes, what do you do first? What's it? What's that? Make payments that you need to. And so after you've paid the bills or make the payments that you need to, what's left over? Your discretionary funds. Somebody said Taco Bell money. Run for the border. Be careful. Anyway, that was a political joke. I don't know if anybody got that. National Guard, run for Taco Bell. Anyway. Yes, it was too complicated to be a joke. Right? So discretionary effort. So your discretionary funds are all those funds that you have that are at your disposal, at your discretion, right? So you can go to Taco Bell or go to a movie, right? With that money. So discretionary effort is very much the same thing. Another way to talk about discretionary effort is this idea that it is also your attitude. Your attitude, right? So what we know about microaggressions and discretionary effort is that they are in relationship to one another. And so as micro inequities or microaggressions go up, discretionary effort goes down. Meaning, here's, does anybody have a friend or a frenemy that gossips? Anybody have a friend or a frenemy that gossips, right? So you know that they talk about somebody all the time, right? What else do you know about that person? Or what assumption can you make about that person? So when I have a friend that gossips, and I have friends that gossip, the thing that's very comforting is I know that they are a gossip. That's comforting to know that they're a gossip, right? Which also lets me know that if they're gossiping about other people, then they're probably doing what about me? Gossiping about me too, right? And there's just something comforting about that. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I just want to share that. I just thought that was a good point. No. So this idea of discretionary effort, we have to recognize that humor and gossip and those kinds of things have a direct impact on discretionary effort and attitudes, right? Does anybody know a good Ole and Lena joke? Anybody ever heard of Ole and Lena? Okay, what's a good Ole and Lena joke? So I'll give you one that I heard from the last class, right? So last class was saying Ole and Lena live in St. Paul, and Ole and they're fighting with each other over where to park because they have a night plow route and a day plow route. And so I don't know if you know, in St. Paul is one side or the other, and so they're arguing with each other over that. So Ole and Lena are arguing, and Ole is saying this side, and Lena is saying this side. And so Ole says, you know what? Since we can't get along on this, let's just park in the garage. Right? Well, what's the butt of kind of the Ole? What's the punchline in all of the Ole and Lena jokes? That they're stupid, right? So either they're stupid or they're naive or they're unsophisticated. I mean, all the jokes kind of go around that punchline, right? But what if we changed Ole and Lena into blondes? Is that a different kind of joke? Yeah, it certainly is a different kind of joke, right? What if we turn Ole and Lena to Polacks? Does that change the tenor of the joke? What if we turn Ole and Lena into Jews? Does that change the joke? We turn it into black people. Does that change the joke? If we turn it into wetbacks, the derogatory term for Latinx folks, right? When we talk about humor, that benign stuff, even that gossip, that impacts people's attitude. So if you're in a workplace and people are telling those types of jokes, and even if it's not about your group, they're trying to undermine or shift people's attitudes, right? So one of the things that we know is that microaggressions are not discrimination, because discrimination is the kind of stuff we can sue about. I can sue about this stuff. But anyone ever had a paper cut? Was the paper cut large or relatively small? Pretty small. What happens when you put salt or vinegar in that, or lemon juice? And you don't want to do that, right? It doesn't feel good at all, right? So microaggressions or microinequities are these little small paper cuts that don't feel very good. But can you imagine death by 1,000 paper cuts? That would be torturous, right? It would be torturous. And so what I would suggest is that these microaggressions become these small little things. What happens if I have all these micro inequities and these microaggressions start stacking up? What do they become? They become discrimination, right? So discrimination doesn't just pop up. Oftentimes, it's these small little things. And one thing that we call this in human resources, we'll call this a hostile environment. Back in the old days, in mechanic shops, they used to have these poster, women's poster calendars and all this kind of stuff in the workplace, in those settings and whatnot. And if you go to Valvoline today, or if you go to, I don't know where you get your oil changed and whatnot, it would not be advantageous for those places to still have those calendars up. Why is that? Because what? Because that would be a form of one of these micro inequities that could lead to discrimination, right? And so, that's important stuff to realize. The other thing, so another one of those protections that's really important for us to realize is Title IX. And what was Title IX designed to do? What was the design of Title IX?
Most about sports, having equal amount of sports for girls as there are for guys.
So having equal amount of sports for girls as there are for guys. All right. So sports teams, making sure the funding is the same, they have the same kinds of opportunities. What we also know about Title IX is that spread just from sports to now talking about all educational activities for women to participate as just like their male counterparts do. Right? So was that necessary to have? Was Title IX necessary to have? Historically speaking, do you think it was necessary? Okay, why? Why was it necessary?
Because it aimed to help close a gap that was there, because it used to be where women couldn't even be educated, and then when they were educated, they didn't receive the same education as guys were. So once education kind of became more level, that they tried to bring up the extracurriculars too. So that helped try to do that, or aim to do that.
It aimed to do that, right? Yeah, so it was necessary because the historical context was that it was not fair and equal, right? So that was in 1972. That was a long time ago. Do we still need this protection, this legal protection? Do we still need this legal protection? I see some people shaking their heads. Yes. Why do you think we still need it?
We still have issues with it today.
Because we still have issues with it today. Can you mention some specific things, or are you
More just general.
just more generally? Okay. Cool. So it was designed to right a wrong. We see that we still have it today. What do you think would happen if it was removed, if we didn't have it any longer? Title IX was not something that folks were thinking about any longer because we've arrived.
I don't think much would happen.
Okay.
I mean, I think most of the thinking has changed. I don't know. I don't see it as too necessary today.
Okay. Cool. Yes.
Other than sports, what does Title IX cover?
All educational activities that women
As
participate
far
in.
as sports go, I think if it wasn't in place, I don't think be like, oh, we don't have Title IX, let's get rid of women's hockey. Like it's not. I don't think it would be that. But I also don't know what it all does throughout the rest of education. So as far as the sports thing goes, I don't think it changes sports that much then.
Okay. But yes.
From my experience with it, there's been a lot of schools that aren't allowed to have teams, like because of Title IX. So let's say there's UVM or anywhere in Minnesota that doesn't have a D1 soccer team, and that's due to Title IX. They can't have it because of Title IX at this point. So removing it, having it, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's done good things, but I think it's limiting schools to what they
So
can
say
have.
that again. I don't.
So Title IX, so there's a lot of schools around the country that are limited to the amount of sports they can, or what guy sports they can have now because of this. So like, or girls sports. So a lot of schools I know of can't have D1 programs for soccer. Or like, for example, I went to CSU freshman year, first semester. They have a women's soccer team that's D1, but they aren't allowed to have a men's soccer team. So to me, I just feel like this kind of,
You have 50,000 people.
yeah, I feel like it's just kind of like weird. I don't know. I think it's served its purpose, but I've heard a lot of people's opinion on it, like, why can't we have this right now? It's just not allowing us to have sports at a high level.
But I also think it's interesting that there is a male football program, but there's not a female football program. But there's a female soccer program, but there's not a male soccer program.
Right, but if you think about like how many females actually play football, that's my point. They can play football, but who's actively pursuing a football team as a female? There's a few, but as men in the world, like soccer is the biggest sport in the entire world. So I mean, like.
So I think your point is a good one. I mean, I think that argument is a good argument.
Right.
However, if soccer was what you say it is, wouldn't it be advantageous for the University of Minnesota to stop doing football and do soccer?
Why can't we have both?
No, I'm just curious. So the same could be, the argument could also be said about women's football. Why can't there be a women's football?
There can, but who's actively pursuing it?
No. That's not the question of pursuing it isn't on the table. The question of access is, right? So you're saying that the University of Minnesota is limited because they have a women's soccer team, but they can't have a men's soccer team. But if they had a women's soccer team, a women's football team, would people have the opportunity to pursue it? Because right now they don't have the opportunity to pursue.
I guess we don't either. We wouldn't have the opportunity, or men wouldn't have the opportunity to pursue a soccer team too. So I mean, I'm just saying it just feels limiting from my experience and what I've learned about it, what my coaches have talked about, what I've experienced from collegiate coaches and their opinions on it. It's just interesting. I mean, I don't really know all the legality, like all the legal implications of it, but it is limiting to college athletics.
And one might argue that the limit that you feel is a liberation to someone else.
Okay, I just want to play sports.
Yeah, no. There was another hand over here. There was another hand over here. No? Okay. Yeah, we'll go back over there.
Well, I mean, I just think it's fairly evident that men and women have different interests generally, and men are generally more athletic and generally more interested in that. There's plenty of women that are interested in athletics, but I mean, forcing, or when they go for equality, or I mean, I don't know who they is, but when they go for equality, it often turns into going for sameness, and that's a whole different thing when you're talking about different races. That's a whole different discussion than men and women, because men and women are obviously different. I mean, there's differences. You can't force sameness. So I mean, if there's going to be enough, I would venture a guess that if they opened up a women's football team, there wouldn't be much interest in it, and it would slowly die off. And if they opened up the men's soccer team, it would probably sustain itself with enough interest. I don't know. That's just a stereotype. But
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly that.
I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, at the end of the day, any college is going to do what's most profitable for them. So with Title IX, you only have a certain amount of sports. They're going to have female and soccer team because I would say female soccer players are better than guy soccer players from what I've seen personally. And that's
too messy.
Yeah, we all got a little messy stuff going on. So,
The common, like in high school,
American soccer.
well, yeah, so there is it.
yeah.
And for football for guys, that's one of the biggest sports in America. It's going to make the most money, and so it makes sense for why Title IX would work. Because why would the school then pay for two different sports teams, one for two for guys, while only the girls get one team, because so much money gets allocated to a certain amount of teams.
Yep. So I want to throw this out here because this is something that is that's very interesting because we have a lot of mansplaining happening right now. Anybody familiar with that concept of mansplaining? Right. So men speak for women as if they are women and they know what's going on with women. So if there's anybody who wants to stop that mansplaining, feel free to just jump in and stop it. Go ahead. More mansplaining.
No. I'll mansplain to me. Because I can't mansplain. So I don't think my comments really necessarily had anything to do with the effect of women and what they shouldn't have or what they should have. I'm saying sports are sports. Why not bring income using both of them? It's not about men and women. To me, to some people it is, but like athletics are things that we're passionate about, and we should be able to have both of them. I don't think it's a gender issue for me, but for some people it is, and that's where it's.
And what I would say, I appreciate your passion for the sport, but you and I both know that it's not just about the passion of the sport. It's about the money that sport generates, right? Yeah, no, just general, right? So the NCAA, the Final Four, that's not just for the school. Minneapolis wants to continue to have a Final Four thing. The place I grew up in, Dayton, Ohio, they bank, not just the school, but the community at large, banks on the Final Four, just one bracket, one night of a bracket in their city, right? So go ahead.
Oh no, I don't have anything.
Oh, okay, cool. So if it was just about the sport, that would be one thing. But the money has to be accounted for as well, because that is a large driver. Why didn't women have sports before? They weren't interested in sports. No, they were interested in sports, but they weren't generators, financial generators. I guarantee you, if the Minnesota, if the Lynx, stop being as good as they are, and they weren't money makers, it will go away. The WNBA will go away. But I will tell you that there will come a time when men and women in the NBA will play on the same team. And I can't wait to see that. That is going to be so fun, right? To see men and women on the same team. Right? People are like, that'll never happen. I used to say that about bathrooms, right? About different colored people sitting in different chairs, right? So it's the same kind of thing. But I didn't want to hang too much on that. But I did want to talk about this idea of look, this is probably one I love when we have these conversations. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. I don't like the mansplaining thing, but the sisters will, be empowered to do something about that. So just kind of looking at this, moving beyond this kind of gender binary, and the truth of our human existence is that both our gender expression and our gender identity and gender roles are not only contextual, but they fall on a spectrum, right? So there's not one person that is totally, I'm 100% masculine. I'm Mr. T. But we fall on a spectrum between masculinity and femininity, right? So I'm sure you've met women who are more masculine and women that are extremely feminine. The same with males who are, very masculine, and then some that are a bit more feminine. The problem has been that sometimes people confuse those ways of being with sexual choice or sexual preference and blah, blah, blah. And we're moving beyond this idea of just this binary because we're much more complex than just on and off switches, right? So, so that's important for us to kind of talk about. And then FERPA is our protection, educational protection for our information. And so that's important for us to kind of talk about. The meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk about today is really around this, around mental health and the ADA. And I'm going to have us break into small groups in just a second, but I sent out an email. I'm not sure if folks have checked their email yet, about a film that I want you to watch on Wednesday, because we won't have class on Wednesday because it's an advisory day. All right, so we won't have class on Wednesday, but the class is called Certain Proofs: Students with Disabilities Fight for Inclusion in Public Schools. And so I'm going to have us break up into groups of 3 or 4 and kind of discuss these questions. And if you can have one person be your spokesperson for those questions, that would be great. And so I'll give some time to talking about those things. because this is directly in relationship to this idea of discrimination, talking about Title IX. We're really looking to try to eliminate discrimination by having inclusive environments for all students, all right? So if you can get to groups of 3 or 4, and I'll give about 10 minutes to kind of go through these questions. And if you could have one person that is your report out person, that would be great, all right? So 10 minutes starting now. So I'll set the timer. So those are the questions, and I'll set the timer on my phone. Oh, sweet.
Let's just let others. Yeah, we don't have to. All right.
Yeah. Educational settings.
You make an accommodation, technically an education.
So it's so hard to like
Three, two, one. Cool. So, what is the ADA? Who'd like to address that? Yes, please.
So the ADD is what? Oh, wait, what? What's wrong?
ADA.
I said ADA. Anyway, as I was saying, the Americans with Disability Act, and so what this is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, school, transportation, private places.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? So what is a disability? Did anyone pull that up as how are disabilities defined by the ADA? Yes, please.
These can range from race, color, sex, national origin, age, religion.
Okay. What else?
The term disability means with respect to an individual, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such an individual, a record of such impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment.
All right, cool. So what is a disability? It is the impairment of any life activity. All right. So if you hear that, if you ever hear that question again, maybe like on a final exam or something, you might be able to pick it up just really quickly that it is a major life impairment, right? Is a disability. All right. So what are some examples of mental disabilities? What are some examples of mental disabilities? So ADHD, which is what? What do all those initials mean?
attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
All right, hyperactivity disorder. What else?
Dyslexia.
Dyslexia,
Bipolar disorder.
bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, excessive compulsive disorder. Sometimes autism can fall into that category depending on where they are on the spectrum, right? Yes.
Depression.
That is what I was going for. So is depression a disability? Or is it a mental illness? What do you think? Please.
I think it depends on like how clinical it is
All right.
and how it impacts the student.
So what is the definition of a disability? Go ahead.
Definition of a disability.
No, go.
I was gonna add on, maybe it depends on how it affects their actions.
Uh-huh.
Physically affects them.
How it appears, their actions, how clinical it is. There was another guess.
There are actual disabilities related to depression, where like major depressive disorder, where it becomes so dangerous to oneself that you're not able to care for yourself in terms of like suicidal thoughts or thoughts of actually trying to commit suicide and not being able to do what you need to do.
Which goes back to our definition of a disability. What's the definition of a disability? Major impairment of a life function. Can depression be a major disruption of a life function? Yes, it can. Right. So thank you for that primer. I owe you $10, right? So And the reason I wanted to bring that up is, particularly in schools, what's one of the major mental illnesses that we may have to combat? And I would suggest that depression is one of those. That's one of those major ones that we have to combat, right? So we'll talk about how to do that later and whatnot. In educational settings, what do we believe about all learners? That they
that everybody has opportunities to learn, but sometimes those opportunities are differently for everyone.
So in play, when we start talking about students' differences in terms of the ADA or mental health, how do these start to play out? How do those two terms play out? Yes, please.
Like different ways of testing, longer times in a thrown environment, just helping the student.
All right, so helping the student, maybe different environment for testing, longer times.
I was going to say that when you're dealing with students with like special needs or mental illnesses, you lean more towards equity than equality, because you can't look at them and take away that disability, because it's like taking away part of who they are. So it's like, how can you work with the abilities that they do have, and what services can you provide to ensure that they're successful and that they have good outcomes?
All right.
So like seeing them as like positives and things that you can work with and alongside.
So seeing the positives and the things you can work alongside. All right, yes.
If you're looking at equity versus equality, if you're giving a test in English to a bunch of students that speak, a class that has 7 different languages spoken, that's not going to have all of them be successful. But if you have equity in the classroom, you have a different test for each different spoken language for those students, that is going to be more equitable.
Yeah. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to mix metaphors. Right? Because having a mental illness is different than a language challenge, right? So I don't want to mix those things. So can you give me something that specifically kind of talks about this idea of having a mental health challenge or a disability that we're working with? Can you think of another way that you can talk about that?
If you have a student that's dyslexic and they can't read their exam, having a para sit down with them and read for them and let them interact with the test in a different way than a student that does not have dyslexia.
Yeah. So great. So I'm glad you make that link to kind of bring apples to apples, right? We know that dyslexic people can read. They just read differently, right? So I think the part that you said around having them interact with the test differently than other students, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And so when we talk about this idea of equity versus equality, again, it's about giving students what they need versus just giving everyone the same kinds of things. The language part is a little different because there's some, particularly if I'm giving a spelling test, I'm not giving, and I'm in first grade, I'm not giving the spelling test in everybody's language when we're learning English, right? So they still would have to have those basic competencies in English, no matter what their home language is. So that's why I wanted to make sure that those metaphors didn't get mixed. And then lastly, a 504 plan, and I think that's our time, right? Oh no, we get 2 minutes. Other folks, in terms of equity and equality, what might be some other examples in a classroom setting where these things become manifest because we're trying to apply the ADA or IDEA? I'll talk about IDEA in just a second. Okay, I hope I didn't squelch individual voices in that presentation. But a 504 plan is simply what? What is that?
It's an individual plan created by the teachers of the student and the parents that is legally binding, that the teachers have to provide what's on the plan, like any assistance that the student needs throughout the year.
Yeah.
And it can change year to year.
Is there another example of a type of 504 plan? An IEP, what do those letters mean?
Education program or plan.
Okay, depending on where you are, it could be a program or a plan, individual education plan. And the purpose of those, is that to create unfair advantages? I would suggest that they're designed to even the playing field in terms of giving people what they need as opposed to what they deserve or what they want. What we also know is that in any human system, where's the failing typically? Where do human systems fall apart? Where they go awry? Where do they get all messed up? With the humans, right? With the humans. So you put humans in any kind of system, it gets mucked up, right? So for your homework, you are to view this movie. Certain Proof: Students with Disabilities Fight for Inclusion in Public Schools. I'll be prepared to talk with them on Friday. Otherwise, I will see you in cyberspace.
No, I just asked you.
Yeah.